The rain poured down in relentless waves, drenching the industrial streets of Chicago. Steam curled up from a manhole cover, twisting into the frigid night air like ghostly fingers. James, a wiry black man in his late 40s, crouched beneath a makeshift shelter of cardboard and tarp near an alley. His clothes were tattered, his sneakers barely holding together, yet his eyes carried a quiet, unyielding strength. That's when he noticed it. A sleek black car sat a block away, hazard lights flashing like frantic signals. Even through the downpour, he could make out a man pacing beside it, phone pressed to his ear, frustration evident in his stance. James squinted, his breath misting in the cold. Another rich guy stranded. He shook his head but felt something stir inside him. Pulling his coat tighter, he braced against the rain and trudged toward the car. As he got closer, the driver's face became clear. A tall man, mid-30s, dressed in a sharp suit that screamed wealth. But this wasn't just anyone. James recognized him instantly. Ethan Walker, the tech mogul whose face was splashed across billboards, selling the latest revolutionary app. A local celebrity. But right now, he looked completely out of his element. Ethan spotted James approaching and instinctively took a step back, his eyes darting to the shadows, assessing the stranger. "I've got a tow truck coming," Ethan called out over the rain, his voice firm. James raised his hands in a calm gesture. "Relax, man. Just trying to help." His voice was rough but steady. He glanced at the car and smirked. "Looks like a bad alternator. Won't get far unless you fix it." Ethan hesitated, his skepticism obvious. "You know cars." James smirked, nodding toward the vehicle. "Worked in a shop for years. Before, well, life happened." He shrugged. "I can take a look, save you some time in this mess." A beat passed before Ethan exhaled, nodding. James crouched beside the car, rain dripping from his cap as he popped the hood. His hands moved with surprising precision despite the bitter cold. "Got a flashlight?" James asked. Ethan fumbled for his phone, awkwardly holding it up to illuminate the engine. Within minutes, James pinpointed the issue, patched a connection, and wiped his hands on his coat. "That'll hold for now," he said, standing up. "But you'll need to get it properly checked tomorrow." Ethan stared, half in shock. "You actually fixed it?" James shrugged. "Didn't take much, just needed someone who knows what they're doing." Reaching into his wallet, Ethan pulled out a crisp $100 bill. "Here. Thank you." James shook his head and stepped back. "Keep it. Kindness ain't got a price tag." With that, he turned and disappeared into the night as swiftly as he'd appeared. Ethan stood there, the rain now a forgotten nuisance, watching James vanish into the shadows. For reasons he couldn't quite explain, a pang of guilt twisted in his gut. The next morning, James woke to the familiar hum of the city stirring to life. Car horns blared in the distance, the murmur of early commuters filling the air. Rubbing his hands together to chase away the lingering cold, he ignored the dull ache of hunger, a feeling he'd long since learned to live with. Stepping onto the sidewalk, he wove through the usual downtown chaos. Then, out of nowhere, a man in a tailored gray suit appeared. He looked out of place in this part of town, standing near a group of men waiting for their morning coffee handouts. His eyes scanned the crowd, until they locked onto James. "Are you James?" the man asked. The man's voice was polite but firm. James straightened, instinctively wary. "Who's asking?" Without answering, the stranger extended a pristine white envelope, the kind James hadn't seen in years. Something about it screamed importance. "This is for you," the man said simply, then turned and walked away, leaving no time for questions. James stared at the envelope, hesitant to open it. He glanced around, half expecting someone to jump out and yell, "Gotcha!" But no one paid him any mind. Slowly, he slid a finger under the seal and tore it open. Inside was an elegant card embossed with the name Ethan Walker. Below it, an address and a short message. "Thank you doesn't feel like enough. Please meet me here tomorrow at noon. Ethan Walker." James stood frozen, staring at the card as if it were written in a foreign language. Why would a guy like Ethan want to see him? His first instinct was to toss the card. It had to be some kind of joke. But as the seconds passed, curiosity and, though he hated to admit it, a flicker of hope began creeping in. The next day, James found himself standing in front of a gleaming high-rise in a part of the city he usually avoided. The building's glass facade shimmered under the midday sun, and people in sharp suits moved in and out with purpose. He glanced down at his worn-out clothes and scuffed sneakers, suddenly feeling out of place. Maybe this was a mistake, he muttered, turning to leave. Before he could take another step, a doorman approached him with a warm smile. "Mr. James." James hesitated, then nodded. "Mr. Walker is expecting you. Right this way." The grand glass doors swung open, and James stepped into a world that felt like a different planet. The lobby was sleek and polished, the air scented with something expensive. He followed in stunned silence, heart pounding louder with each step. Then came the elevator, smooth, silent, and far too fast. Before he could fully process it, the doors slid open onto the 25th floor, revealing a sprawling office flooded with natural light. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a breathtaking view of the Chicago skyline, while modern furniture sat in perfect harmony with the space. James hesitated at the entrance, unsure whether he should step inside. Then a familiar voice broke his thoughts. "James." Ethan Walker approached, a warm smile replacing the frazzled expression James had seen in the rain. Gone was the man pacing beside a broken-down car. This Ethan exuded confidence and control. "Thanks for coming," Ethan said, extending a hand. James shook it cautiously, his rough, calloused fingers meeting Ethan's smooth, manicured grip. "I wasn't sure if this was real," James admitted, his voice low. Ethan chuckled. "I don't blame you. It's not every day someone like me crosses paths with someone like you." He gestured toward a seating area. "Please, sit. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" James waved off the offer and sank into the plush chair. Its softness was foreign to him. He glanced around, still unsure what this was all about. Ethan sat across from him, leaning forward. "Look, James. I owe you an apology." James raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "Last night, I was rude to you. Hesitant. Dismissive. And yet, you helped me without asking for anything in return." Ethan exhaled, shaking his head. "That stuck with me. I couldn't stop thinking about it." James shifted in his seat, uncomfortable with the attention. James shrugged. "It was no big deal," he mumbled. "It was a big deal," Ethan countered, his tone firm. "You had nothing to gain, yet you still did it. That kind of selflessness is rare." James shifted in his seat, unsure how to respond. Ethan continued, "It made me realize something. I've been living in a bubble, surrounded by people who only care about what they can get from me. But you broke through that." Reaching into his jacket, Ethan pulled out another envelope and handed it to James. "This is just the first step." James hesitated before carefully opening it, half expecting another thank-you note. But what he found made his breath catch. A check. For $10,000. James' eyes widened. I can't take this," he stammered, immediately pushing it back toward Ethan. "You can and you will," Ethan insisted, his voice leaving no room for argument. James shook his head, still in disbelief. "Why would you do this?" Ethan exhaled, then leaned forward. "Because this isn't just about money. I want to offer you something more meaningful, a chance to rebuild." He paused, as if carefully choosing his next words. "I'm starting a foundation," he finally said. "One that helps people who've fallen through the cracks of society. People like you. And I don't just want you to be someone we help, I want you to be part of it. To help others." James blinked, his mind racing. "Why me?" Ethan met his gaze. "Because you understand what it's like. You've lived it. And that means you have something most people don't, insight, empathy, and the ability to truly make a difference." James swallowed hard, staring at the check in his hands. For the first time in a long time, a feeling stirred inside him, something dangerously close to hope. Someone like me could never fully grasp what you've been through, Ethan admitted. This foundation isn't about charity, it's about creating real opportunities. And I think you'd be perfect to help shape it. For a moment, James couldn't speak. The room blurred as emotions swirled, disbelief, gratitude, and a cautious hope he hadn't felt in years. Ethan leaned forward. Think about it. Take your time. But know this, he paused, locking eyes with James. You deserve this. You deserve a chance to turn things around. James left the office, the check clutched tightly in his hand. The weight of the moment pressed down on him. The streets of Chicago felt different now, less harsh, almost alive with possibility. But along with that glimmer of hope came doubt. What if he failed? What if this was too good to be true? The next few days were a blur of careful decisions. James used part of the money to buy a clean set of clothes and book a modest motel for a week. For the first time in years, he stepped into a shower without rushing, letting the hot water wash away layers of grime and exhaustion. As he stared at his reflection in the mirror, he barely recognized the man looking back. The day he returned to Ethan's office, James felt a mix of nerves and determination. Ethan greeted him with the same warm smile and wasted no time introducing him to the Foundation's small but dedicated team. This is just the beginning, Ethan explained as they walked through the office. We're still building everything from the ground up, but with your input, we'll make it something real. Something lasting. James met with case managers, grant writers, and outreach coordinators. People who treated him with a level of respect he hadn't felt in years. And to his surprise, when he shared his story, they truly listened. Ethan's vision for the Foundation became clearer. It wasn't just about temporary aid, it was about long-term change. Job training programs, mental health support, and transitional housing were all on the agenda. And James, with his first-hand experience, was asked to help design some of the programs. People don't just need money, James said one day during a brainstorming session. They need someone to believe in them. That's what you gave me, Ethan. And that's what we've got to give others. As the Foundation grew, so did James. With Ethan's help, he rented a small studio apartment near the office. He started eating regularly, his gaunt frame slowly filling out. But the real change wasn't just physical. One afternoon, Ethan walked into James's office, grinning. You've got your first success story. James raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Ethan handed him a folder. Inside was the profile of a young man named Andre. Andre had been homeless for 2 years, aging out of the foster care system with nowhere to turn. Ethan slid a folder across the desk. Andre's coming in tomorrow. Thought you might want to sit in on his intake meeting. The next day, James sat across from Andre, a wiry 20-year-old with wary eyes. As the young man cautiously shared his story, James listened intently, nodding at all the right moments. When it was James's turn to speak, he didn't sugarcoat things or offer empty promises. I've been where you are, James said simply. And I know how hard it is to trust when life keeps knocking you down. But if you're willing to try, we'll meet you halfway. I'm proof that it's possible to turn things around. Andre's skepticism wavered, his guarded posture easing just slightly. For the first time in a long while, James felt the rush of truly making a difference. Months passed, and James became an integral part of the Foundation. What had started as a cautious step into the unknown had turned into a purpose-driven life. Each day brought new challenges, but also new opportunities to connect, uplift, and inspire. The Foundation, officially named the Turning Point Initiative, began making waves across the city. And James? He quickly became its beating heart. Word of his transformation spread, first within the community, then beyond. Reporters took notice, captivated by the story of a man who went from sleeping on the streets to leading life-changing programs. James found himself in front of news cameras, his face and voice representing the mission Ethan had envisioned. But none of that mattered to James. What mattered were the people. He watched as individuals like Andre, once invisible, began believing in themselves. He saw mothers reunited with their children, veterans finding stability, young adults breaking free from cycles of poverty, Every success reminded James why he had chosen to stay. One afternoon, he visited an old stomping ground, the underpass where he used to sleep. The faces there were familiar. Some friendly, others hardened by time. James handed out flyers for the foundation, sharing his story with anyone willing to listen. "I know it feels hopeless," he told a small group of men and women. "I used to think the same thing. But there are people out there who care, who will fight for you if you're ready to fight for yourself. I'm proof of that." A man, arms crossed, scoffed. "What makes you think anyone's gonna help me? People only care about themselves." James met his gaze. "That's what I thought too, until someone proved me wrong. Don't let pride or fear keep you where you are. If you're ready, we've got a place for you." Over the following weeks, one by one, some from that group showed up at the foundation's doors. Each of them began their own journey toward stability, inspired by James's unwavering belief in the power of change. As the Turning Point initiative grew, its reach extended beyond the city. Donations poured in from people moved by the extraordinary story of a millionaire and a homeless man whose chance encounter changed everything. Schools, churches, and local businesses partnered with the foundation, creating a network of support that lifted the entire community. Ethan often marveled at the transformation. "You've become the face of hope," he told James one afternoon. James chuckled, shaking his head. "I'm just paying it forward. You planted the seed. I'm just making sure it keeps growing." James's voice was steady, but there was weight behind his words. The room fell silent, every eye fixed on him. "I thought the world only looked after those who already had enough. I thought I was invisible." He glanced at Ethan, then at the crowd. But one act of kindness changed everything. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about status. It was about being seen. Murmurs rippled through the audience, the rawness of his words cutting through the polished elegance of the evening. James continued, "The Turning Point initiative isn't just about giving people food or shelter, it's about restoring dignity. It's about proving that no one is beyond hope. That no one is too lost to find their way back." He turned to the screen behind him, where images of those helped by the foundation appeared. Andre, now a mentor for at-risk youth. A mother reunited with her children. A veteran starting his own business. "These aren't just success stories," James said. "They're proof of what happens when we choose to care." The room erupted in applause, but James barely heard it. He wasn't doing this for recognition. He was doing it because he knew, deep down, what it meant to be given another chance. As the night drew on, donors pledged record-breaking amounts. The foundation's future had never looked brighter. Later, as the event wound down, Ethan clinked his glass against James's. "You know," he said with a grin, "for someone who used to avoid the spotlight, you sure know how to own a room." James chuckled. "I'm just telling the truth." Ethan nodded. "And that's why people believe in you." As James stepped out onto the museum's grand terrace, the city stretched before him, no longer an unforgiving landscape, but a place filled with possibility. He had found his purpose. And for the first time in his life, he truly felt free. James stood on the balcony of his modest apartment, looking out over the city that had once felt so unforgiving. The distant hum of traffic mixed with the faint laughter of children playing in the street below. He thought about that rainy night, the night he first met Ethan, and how one simple act of kindness had changed everything. As he gazed at the horizon, his phone buzzed with a message. It was from Andre. "Got the job. Couldn't have done it without you. Thank you." James smiled, a warm sense of pride washing over him. He typed back, "You did the hard part. Keep going." The world hadn't magically become perfect. There were still struggles, still nights when doubt crept in, but James had found something stronger than fear, a reason to keep moving forward. As the years passed, the Turning Point initiative became more than just a local foundation. It became a national pillar of hope. Ethan and James expanded its reach, opening programs in multiple states and creating a blueprint for how communities could combat homelessness and systemic inequality. By his early 50s, James had become a symbol of resilience and redemption. His once rugged face now bore a quiet confidence, and his presence carried the weight of lived experience. Yet, he remained grounded, never losing touch with the people he served. One summer, the foundation hosted its largest event yet, a fundraising gala at the Art Institute of Chicago. The guest list included celebrities, politicians, and philanthropists, all eager to contribute to the cause. Dressed in a tailored suit, something that still felt both foreign and fitting, James stood beside Ethan as they addressed the crowd. Ethan spoke first, recounting their fateful meeting on a rainy night. "If not for James, I'd probably still be stranded on the side of that road. But what he gave me that night wasn't just help, it was perspective. And that's what the Turning Point Initiative is all about, helping people see the potential in themselves and others." When it was James's turn to speak, he scanned the room, faces of influence and wealth staring back at him. "I used to think people like you didn't care about people like me," he began, his voice steady but full of emotion. "But I learned that sometimes, all it takes is one act of kindness to bridge that gap. That's what we're doing here, building bridges. And I hope every single one of you leaves tonight inspired to build your own." The room erupted in applause, and the event raised a record-breaking amount for the foundation, paying it forward. Back on the ground, the foundation's work continued to evolve. James spearheaded a mentorship program, pairing individuals who had successfully transitioned out of homelessness with those just starting their journey. One of his proudest ments, Tasha, had been homeless with her 2 children after escaping an abusive relationship. With James's guidance and the foundation's resources, she secured housing, enrolled in a job training program, and eventually became a caseworker herself. At her graduation ceremony, she hugged James tightly, tears streaming down her face. "You gave me my life back," she whispered. James shook his head with a smile. "You took it back. I just reminded you that you could." A full circle moment. One day, as James walked through the foundation's bustling headquarters, a young man approached him hesitantly. His clothes were worn, his posture uncertain, but in his eyes there was a flicker of determination. "Mr. James," the man said, his voice trembling slightly, "I heard your story. I want to try. I don't want to be out there anymore." James smiled, placing a reassuring hand on the man's shoulder. "You've already taken the hardest step just by walking through those doors. Let's figure out the rest together." The moment reminded James of that first night with Ethan, how one moment of connection had set everything in motion. It was never about grand gestures or perfect plans. It was about showing up, offering a hand, believing in the power of change. A life transformed. That evening, James stood in the foundation's lobby, watching the comings and goings of staff and clients. A deep sense of peace settled over him. Outside, the rain began to fall, pattering against the windows, a distant echo of the night that changed everything. He thought back to Ethan's words from so many years ago. "You deserve it." At the time, he hadn't believed it. But now, seeing the lives transformed and the hope rekindled in so many, James finally understood. It was never about deserving. It was about deciding. Deciding to give, to trust, and to take a chance on something better. And as the rain continued to fall, James knew one thing for certain. He would keep building those bridges, one act of kindness at a time.